national side, the Europeans somehow lag behind on this, and part of the reason, except for the Scandinavian countries, which are big producers of paper, and part of the reason was the technical one. They had used a lot more carbonate as filler in their book and printing papers, and so the deterioration problem was not quite as great as the one here, where we used alum as a sizing, and not so much carbonate. And there's another factor too. That's the parliamentary type of government that you have in Europe. Here, a pressure group, an interest group like the American Library Association, can go to the Congress and get a bill introduced and get it started, and then the executive branch either has to support it or not support it, but anyway, you can get an independent initiative. In Europe, you have to persuade the government to do it. You got to persuade the bureaucrats to do it, because no bill is going to pass unless it's introduced as a government bill by the government.
It's actually the executive branch of the government.
The executive and the parliamentary are the same. The executive is a committee of the parliament.
Yes. So it's quite different.
That's right.
They're so independent.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So you can't use that avenue. You have to persuade the bureaucrats, and they're hard to persuade. Having been one myself, I know that. That's right.
That's a very interesting point.
But to bring it up to date, they gradually Europe got into the act. There was but it was slow. In 1995, there was an organization called the European Foundation for Library Cooperation. It was kind of an intergovernmental, inter-country library association called the Foundation for Library Cooperation, Groupe de Lausanne. They cooperated and got a survey made of European publishers, what they were doing about permanent paper, what they using, and so whether they even knew about it. The survey was published in 1995, and it showed that there's very little knowledge about permanent paper, and only a minority of publishers were using it. Then there was but meanwhile, there was a catalog of European publishers published by the same library group and with a publishing association, and publishers who had paper that met the American National Standard of 1992. At that time, nobody was using the the International Standard of 1994, which was based on the American Standard. And by that time, there was quite a lot. There were at least 25 papers that met the standard, the American National Standard. That numbered ion permanent papers. This followed a catalog that Ellen McCready had put out.
By a catalog, you mean a list of the paper mills that produce?
Yeah, I'll explain it. The origin of this was that, I think in 1993, when we were still concerned about this problem of conflict between the executive order on recycling, requiring the use of a certain amount of recycled material, and the permanent paper law. So we got to talking on the phone, and I said, we ought to find out how much of a problem this is. Are there permanent papers with a considerable amount of recycled material, so that it wouldn't present a problem? So she said, I've been thinking of a survey anyway. And so she undertook to write to all the paper mills in the United States and Canada and ask for information by brand name of every paper that they produced that met the American National Standard of 1992. And the result was this first catalog in 1994. And at that time, she got responses so that she was able to say, she wrote to 60 paper couples, and she sent them a copy of the Standard. She got 28 responses for 1994 survey. 28 companies, and they reported that they were producing 387 papers, classified by name, classified by company and use. And these were all kinds of papers, including xerographic papers. She subsequently did this over again in 1995 and increased the number of companies and increased the number of papers.
All alkaline papers.
Not only alkaline, but seeking a permanent paper standard. We also use this catalog to include in the last mailing to the governors, so that their people could see that this is not a problem. If you want to do it, you can get the papers easily enough.
Very good point.
That's right.
It's not theoretical.
Yeah, right. So that brings us to the present situation. We don't have any direct measure, really, of how much permanent paper is being used in books and documents. In the original Powell resolution, there was an encouragement to publishers to tell what kind of paper was being used, if this was permanent or alkaline paper, to put it in the book. And this would mean that the librarians could put it into their bibliographic records. And so they wouldn't have to go around testing papers to know whether it was alkaline or not. And also it would then get into the cataloging and publication system, which means that the computerized records of libraries all over the country would have it automatically in their computerized catalogs.
How about the Library of Congress? Is that
they run the catalog system, which is called cataloging and publication, and therefore supply the libraries of the United States and abroad too with the cataloging information. So if they've got this about the paper, then it goes very easily into the computerized record of the individual libraries.
Yeah. I make use of access to the Library of Congress catalog through my computer.
Right.
It's very handy. I use it quite often. Right. And I've never seen any reference to whether the book was permanent or.
Well, the only ones that use it supply that information systematically to the Library of Congress, unfortunately, are the university presses.
Oh, yeah.
And the other presses, publishers got started saying, well, we can't do that because the second and third printings may not be on alkaline paper. And even though all the printings are probably on alkaline paper now, the library is not concentrated on getting to do that, and so we don't have any direct measure by that measure. So what we have primarily is indirect measure. And this catalog of permanent paper availability is one measure. And another measure is that in the third and final report of the three agencies to the Congress, which was as of December 31, 1995, the GPO stated that they bought, one of their ways of buying paper is by competitive bid and book purchase, no bidder. And at that, in 1995, 99.9% of the book papers procured through bulk purchase by the government printing office were alkaline. It's an incredible development.
Fantastic. That's really
Great.
This third report, unfortunately there were very other important developments reported, got lost again when it got over to the Congress, and we're now in the process of finding it once more and getting it printed as a Senate document. But meanwhile, I got on to